Presidents, Secretary, Head of Department, and officers from municipal throughout Malaysia. Our facilitator, Jeffrey Delmon, Senior Infrastructure Finance Specialist, World Bank Singapore. Abhijit Baumik, Public-Private Partnership and Infra Finance Consultant from New Delhi. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the third session of the Leadership Training for Municipality on Public-Private Partnership toward Development of Smart City. Today, our facilitator will provide an introduction to municipal public-private partnership and how public-private partnership able to create long-term partnership between municipality and the private sector and its benefits. Also, they will give you several case studies for you to understand better scenario and steps need to be taken to overcome the situation. Now, I would like to hand over to Jeffrey Delmon to conduct the session. Off to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anusha, and welcome all. This is a very interesting concept of doing a training where I can't see any of you. All I can see is Anusha and Abhijit with their smiling faces. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. If now, it will be very boring if all you have to do is sit there and listen to me and Abhijit chat. So please use the chat function. Tell you what, I'm going to test, see if everybody knows how to use the chat. Could you please extra credit points to whoever puts up a chat message first? Waiting. No chats? Ah, excellent. So Ezatool gets the first extra credit points. Well done. Now that's one person that's put up a chat. Very disappointing participation. So my name is Jeff. I'm from the World Bank. I am a PPP specialist. I've been working in PPP for 25 years, something like that. I was in the private sector first for 11 years, and I'm a lawyer by background. So I worked in big law firms doing PPP project finance transactions from the private sector side, working for banks and for investors and a few governments. And then I joined the World Bank about 15 years ago. And since then, I've been advising governments on how to set up their transactions, give the private sector what they need to get the deal done, but also make sure the government gets what it needs and not to obviously get a balance between the public and private. And then more recently, I've been doing a lot more work helping governments set up the institutions, the legal framework, getting everything ready so that you not just do a project, but you do a whole program of projects. And that way you get the efficiency, right? You get the economies of scale. That's when your transactions become less expensive because you've got the experience, but you've also got a practice, you've got a way of doing things. And when you've established that way of doing projects that the private sector is happy with, then you can attract much more private sector investment because they know that you know what you're doing. And they know that they know what you will be doing because this is what you did last time, the time before that, the time before that. This is the way you do PPP deals. So it's much easier to bring in new investors and much easier to bring in financing because the financiers also. The private sector wants things as easy as possible. They want a nice smooth ride as they come in to deliver this project because the actual process of delivering the project is complicated. Much better that they spend their energy delivering the project rather than trying to figure out the bid process, trying to figure out the kind of contract and the kind of risk allocation you're going to use. So that's sort of been my background. Abhijit, would you mind doing a quick presentation? Sell yourself. Tell us how wonderful you are.
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Abhijit Baumik, and I'm right now in Delhi, India. This is where I live. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, I've probably worked on PPP projects for pretty much similar number of years, 23, 24, some such number of years. And a bunch of those, probably 15, 17, 18 years of those have been working with municipalities on urban infrastructure projects. And those, I must confess, are my favorite projects, because the municipal governments really know their citizens, their users much better than any other tier of the government. They're closest. You have water supply stopped for 10 minutes in some part of the town, and the municipal officers will know about it because there is a representative somewhere very close by, people will go, and so on and so forth. So feedback is virtually constant. So really working on projects and structuring PPP projects with municipality is great, and I've really enjoyed that. I worked on, in the beginning years of my PPP work, I've worked on projects in India, and a lot of cities in India have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of municipal PPP projects. I have worked on urban projects in Kenya, in Tanzania, currently working on projects in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, so worked in and around the region, and worked from what's relatively seem like simple projects like market development, which is pretty commercial from a people point of view, all the way to complex continuous water supply projects. So I would look forward to sharing a couple of case studies today, and participate in the Q&A session. So hopefully you're going to throw some really tough questions at Jeff and some easy ones at me. So look forward to that. Jeff?
Excellent. Thanks very much, Abhijit. And so Abhijit and I have worked in a bunch of different places in Tanzania and Kenya in particular, but also in places like Indonesia and Uzbekistan. So it's a huge variety, but what's really interesting is everywhere you go, challenges are very similar, just to different degrees. And so as you go through this process and as you start thinking about these issues, you will have challenges. There will be difficulties. There will be a lot of shortcomings that you identify in the capacity of your municipality. That's okay. There will be bits that are going to be confusing and odd, and that's okay too. But please ask questions. I guarantee if you've got a question, at least 10 other people on this training will have the same question. And you will be the one brave enough to raise your hand and ask the question, and will help all of us learn more. And it's very important that we learn from you as well. We have a lot of experience in a lot of different countries, a lot of different contexts. We need to understand your specific challenges. And it's for that reason that we asked you to fill out these two modules that we sent around, Module 1 and Module 2, to give us a sense of the kind of issues that you're engaging with your projects, within your own municipal governments, with the central government, all the different things, and that will help us understand better how to deliver this training in a way that helps you. But please continue to feed back to us, and that's going to help us do a better job. By the way, I wore my Indonesian batik. Does that work in Malaysia? Is batik anything in Malaysia, or did I totally miss it? No comment. I'm going to take it that that means you love my batik and that it is beautiful and you appreciate the effort. So thank you. So I'm going to share my screen and put up our slides. All right. So topic today, municipal public-private partnerships. I'm going to start from the basics, but I'll try to feed into all of this for those of you that are very comfortable with PPP and the concept and the principles. We will feed into all of this very practical implementation guidance. So don't tune out when we're talking about some of the basics. This is an important part of the overall picture. But so you know what it's like, right? Government is complicated. You have 1,000 different things that you need to do. You see at the bottom of the slide, anything from schools and healthcare and justice systems, maybe not a space program, although you never know, but all these different things that government needs to invest in, to develop, to deliver for the people of the city. And as Abhijit said, it's really exciting working on local government PPP. National government PPP, national government's a little bit more removed from the demands of individuals, from the communities. Local government is right in there in the mix, and you get such a fantastic partnership with the community and an understanding of what the needs of the people. Oh, sorry, complaint that you can't see my batik. Is that better? Huh? Is that beautiful? So the job of government is very complicated, and the amount of money is limited. You've got the transfers from central government, you've got own source revenues, you may have a tax pool locally, you may have other revenue sources locally that you can access, anything from fees and charges to tourism taxes and property taxes. Even then, that pool of money is not sufficient for all the different investment that you want to do. And so this is why there's an interest and a need for PPP. Now, to be very clear, PPP is one instrument. It's not the solution to everything. It only does what it does, and it will resolve, it'll help with a certain slice of what local government needs to do. But the idea behind PPP is that, one, you can deliver more. So if the private sector comes in with financing and with financial resources, that more investment can be made than would be available just from public funding. There are areas where private sector delivers better than public sector. And this is often difficult to admit for government. Government needs to identify the space where government is strong, but also identify the space where private sector is strong. And the two, ideally the two together, can fill the gaps in capacity of the other. And public and private are very different entities, and approach problem solving in different ways. They have different access to technology, to capacity, to resources. And so the combination of the two, the partnership between the two is important. So that third P, public-private partnership, is critical. It's not just about handing stuff off to the private sector. It's a partnership between the public and private. And finally, it's optimizing value, right? So the combination of this, the whole is much larger. You've also got private sector that focuses on different things. We'll get onto that in a second. Within this dynamic, you have the private investor, you have the government, you also have the financiers. Financiers are an important but very different element. They're a different piece to this puzzle. The government wants to deliver services for the people. It's focused on quality of service. It's focused on the cost of that service, because only so much can be charged to the end user. And time is always critical for government. You guys know that, right? Everything is yesterday. And so government is always go, 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 go. And in particular, when very important people make decisions, everything needs to fall into place. The investor is also concerned about quality of service and that kind of thing. Their reputation is on the line. But they're much more focused on money. They're more focused on keeping costs down, on managing procurement processes, on efficiencies within the system. So both within construction, but also during operation. And depending on the nature of the investors, you've got domestic investors, you've also got foreign investors. And I know in Malaysia, you've got a lot of local capacity, a lot of local investors, a lot of local financiers. So it may be that the foreign investor is not of interest to you, but just to round that circle, domestic investors often have higher return assumptions. They have a better understanding of local contexts. So political and country risk are not as much of an issue, but they are often smaller, and therefore large financial undertakings are more challenging. Their access to technology is a little bit different. Their access to methodology is a little bit different. the foreign investor has some advantages in seeing projects all over the world. So they have the methodologies, the technologies that come from experiencing projects all over the world, and they can bring in best practices. But they also will not know the country context, the political context, as well as local investors. And so there's a split between those two. Then the financiers are a very different group of people. They bring in debt. And when a financier brings in debt, the financier does not earn more money if the project goes well. It only receives its debt service. It only receives the interest on its debt. However, they lose if the project is a failure. So they are much more risk averse, much more focused on the downside, whereas the investor is usually more focused on the potential for upside. Also downside as well, obviously, but more focused on that upside. The financiers are less excited about the upside. Upside is always good, but less excited about that upside because they don't get a piece of that pie. They only get a return on, they only get the interest paid back on the debt that they provide. And so you see in our list here, much more of a focus on certainty, on understanding the revenue stream. Am I going to get the revenues? What's the likelihood that the revenues will be less than I think? What's the likelihood that there will be some political, government, country issue that comes into the midst of this and limits the success of the project? How much cushion do I have? So when I look at the amount of money that the project needs to earn to pay back my debt, and then I want to see that there's a little bit more on top of that. Well, I'd like to see a lot more on top of that to protect me, so that if the revenues go down, that eats into the equity return before it gets to my debt repayment. I want my debt repayment to be protected. This cushion, this top part, protects me from that. So that's the perspective from the financiers. And those three have a different approach, different perspective, but the tension is the wrong word. The play between those three groups makes PPP stronger. It's helpful to have lenders ask difficult questions. It's helpful to have investors ask difficult questions. And that's why we spend so much time preparing government for PPP deals. So when these difficult questions come up, government has a good answer. And when government has a good answer, investors and lenders relax because they know government knows what it's doing and they've got everything organized and they're being a good partner. That partnership works. So that's the balance of interest between these three groups of parties. And there are a lot of other people in here. There's also a very nice aspect of PPP, and we see our friend here who looks at the books about do it yourself, how to do your own project, and thinks, I'd rather go to the books that help me get somebody else to do my projects. And there's an element of releasing some of the burden that's on local government to deliver all these different things and be innovative and creative and have bring all these new ideas in and have somebody else that you can lean on to help you deliver some of these solutions. And you've seen, we sent around links to this. We sent the guidance note and a couple of the modules, I think it was 1, 2, and 19 from this municipal PPP framework. This is something that we did within the World Bank. The idea is to try to simplify the process of local government working its way through PPP. And so we've tried to set things out and taken a lot of the PPP knowledge from around the world on all kinds of different projects, try to set it out in a way that is easier for municipalities to get their teeth around. And so you'll see in these, the basic guidelines walk you through the whole process and give you all the basics. And then the modules dive into the more detail. And if you track down this list of modules, you see that you get a lot of the different types of material that you will need to deliver your PPP program. Not just one project at a time, although that helps for that, but it's about the whole programmatic approach. So module 1 and 2 that you've seen, look at your municipality and the way it's set up and ask questions about whether it's set up properly and what the challenges are and what you could get done in the time frame that you've got, with the resources that you've got, and where you might want to invest in better laws, regulations, better institutional arrangements, better coordination, those kind of things. The second one is about individual projects. So I've got an idea for a project. I want to bring it to this module. Some of you have provided us with filled out modules for 1 and 2. Thank you very much. Most of you filled out the, very much agree, don't agree, very much don't agree. Tick that box, and that was great. You didn't tell us anything about your project. And so we'll use that. That's very helpful. We'll use that to go back through and pick through where are the challenges that you're facing, what are the things that you're most focused on. But it's also helpful to understand the specifics about the projects that you're doing. Are you looking mostly at what are your investment needs? What are the things that you need to develop that you may not have budget to develop, but you think would be good for PPP? Is it, bus terminals or public markets or public parking? Is it water, so solid waste management? Is it solar power? Is it waste to energy? All the different types of projects, IT, all the different things that you can do with PPP. Which ones are most interesting for your city? And if you tell us about these things, then we can tweak the presentation so that they address more of these. And if you look down the list, then it goes through the feasibility studies. So how do you develop the knowledge about your project? How do you hire the consultants to help you do this with you and for you? What's the procurement process look like? And then we've even got sample RFQs, RFP, and these are pre-qualification documents, and then bid documents, a sample contract, and then looking at the ex post. So after you've got the contract signed, you need to think about things like implementation. So we've got a bunch of stuff about implementation, about different sectors and the issues that arise, about harnessing land value capture, and we'll address some of these in the training. But this material is there if you need it. It's freely accessible on the web, and let us know if you have any challenges getting connected. All right, so let's take a step back. Let's talk about our PPP. And you'll see a lot of this focus is on that third P. How do you create that partnership? The idea of PPP needs to be public plus private provides more than the sum of its parts. So if you can't get more out of PPP than you would out of just delivering it through a public solution with a private contractor, if you want, if that partnership is not giving you more, then it's probably not worth the effort to do the partnership. PPP is difficult. It's hard work. And I apologize in advance. I don't mean to offend. And please let me know, send me a little chat if I'm offending anybody. But my best metaphor for PPP is marriage. Marriage is about taking two people who are completely different, have been raised in different households, have different backgrounds, and the traditional approach to marriage is a man and a woman. And men and women are completely different entities. They're totally different animals. And I think until I got married, I didn't realize just how different men and women are. But the strength, the power of bringing those two different individuals together in a partnership is amazing. You can do so much. A good marriage is so powerful, but a bad marriage is so painful. And same as PPP, a bad PPP can be so painful. And just like a divorce, a bad PPP, everyone will point in the other direction, will blame the other party. But at the end of the day, you've got to point back at yourself. A bad PPP is at least partly about not having done some of the things that you needed to do. And maybe it's about not having chosen the right partner. And instead of working at finding the right partner, maybe you use the wrong criteria to select that partner. So apologies again if it's annoying, but I'm going to use that metaphor just to bring to a very practical sort of bring home some of these messages about the importance of this partnership. Couple of myths. PPP is not free money. As soon, and this is unfortunately often sold this way by consultants and other people who say, hey, let's do PPP because it's easy, you just throw the project to the private sector, they take care of it, you don't need to worry about it. Not the case. there needs to be a revenue stream for any PPP. And if the revenues don't come from the users, and there's not another way of finding commercial revenue within the project, then the government will need to make up that difference. So there needs to be a revenue stream, absolutely critical. PPP is not cheap or easy. It's a lot of work and it's challenging. And PPP is not privatization. It's not getting rid of assets. It's not selling stuff off. It's a partnership. It's together delivering this. And so if there's a desire just to get rid of something, PPP is not the way to do it. And it's far too challenging to put together to treat it in that way. So PPP is too complex. Privatization is much easier. Well, it's not. Selling off assets, but also creating the regulatory framework to manage it, make sure you're protecting yourself. There are a lot of very similar issues between the mechanisms around privatization and the mechanisms you create within PPP, but the focus is very different between the two. As you get the private sector looking at your projects, it also forces you to ask some really fundamental questions. And so that a private sector entity looking at a project will ask questions about financial viability, whether the revenue streams are sufficient, looking at the cost of financing, looking at all those numbers, but they'll also want to know about economic realities. A private sector player will not want to come into a project that isn't good for the government, that isn't good for the community. Because if it isn't, then the next government that comes in is likely to take down the project. So you need to be aware of that bigger picture and how the project fits into that bigger picture. The technical viability is important, and a PPP is generally not appropriate when there's new technology. We don't want to see new ideas that haven't been tested, because the PPP model is about a long-term partnership based on an agreed level of investment, agreed level of return, long-term financing. You want something that's reliable, that's trustworthy, that's certain. And so brand new technology is often, for some IT projects, there are ways of tweaking it, but it's very difficult. So generally speaking, you wouldn't want to use PPP for new technology. And environmental and social, and in particular for foreign investors. And I don't know the Malay investors as well, but for foreign investors, environmental and social is extremely important. And this is both a question of reputation globally, but also a realization that a project that does not address environmental and social issues, again, is more vulnerable. So new governments are likely to undermine a project that does not meet its environmental and social requirements. So that's the sort of the big picture of PPP. And now we look at all the different types of PPP, and there are a huge number of them. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the different acronyms. So there are some acronyms that have a definition at law, and there will be a definition of PPP under Malay law that needs to be respected and considered when developing your project. But otherwise, things like build, operate, transfer, BOT, BOOT, build, own, operate, transfer. We've got a whole list of them. There are a bunch of different ones. Each sector, each country, and often each project will have a slightly different view of what this means. And there's a tendency to reel out these acronyms. And sometimes that's very helpful. Sometimes everybody's on the same page and you all have done a deal that's used this acronym and we all understand exactly what this means. But for a lot of times, there's not a common understanding. And so we may be speaking past each other by using acronyms that I think it means this and you think it means that, and we miss each other in the middle. So be careful of that. Come back to the fundamentals and find out what exactly you mean. What kind of risk sharing, what kind of commercial arrangement, what kind of financial arrangements are to be involved. And then a lot of these structures, the differences is the risk allocation, how risk is allocated between public and private. And this is going to be critical throughout this analysis. The private sector will want to know, I can see how much I need to, and money I need to invest, what I need to deliver. I need to understand what risks I'm taking so that as the project evolves, I understand how much, what I need to be careful of, what I need to watch out for, what I need to protect myself against, the insurance that I need to get, the kind of approaches I need to take with technology, methodologies, et cetera. There's a tendency by government to use PPP to cram risk down into the private sector. And I know it's very tempting. I know private sector seems like they can do all these different things. Like they've got so much capacity, which is great. But pushing too much risk onto them makes the project vulnerable. And it's also expensive. The more risk you put on the private sector, the more they want to be compensated for the risks that they're bearing. So take that balance very carefully. That balance, if you achieve it right, gets you the best value for money and gets you the best partnership.
Jeff, is it possible for me to interrupt you?
Please.
Okay, there's a statement from Lee Ting Chiu, right? The issue with Malaysia local government financial system is we never report on financial ratio like gearing ratio, return on asset. It is not required under the existing financial report standard. Second statement, we never compare among us how healthy is our financial status compared to another benchmarked LG, and we still using concept of self-sustain in handling local development. Lee, we also have given you access to speak. You can speak now.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Lee.
Yeah, I think this is only my general comment because of what in my experience with local governments, we never talk about this kind of corporate ratio. So when we don't understand where we are, then there is where come the problem. So we want to finance a project, we seldom look for other options. So we will rely on what is the existing financial that we have, and maybe we will look for some. Yes, we are borrowing from bank, but that is under a very rare case, because we also don't have credit rating, I think, for all local governments, right, in Malaysia.
Mm. That's a really, yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's a challenge, frankly, around the world. When a government looks at PPP and bringing in private investment, it usually does that to improve efficiency, to improve the use of capital and use of public funds to achieve better efficiency across both financially and technically. There is often not an incentive for government to reach out to the private sector. In fact, the incentive is inverted. Government incentive, the usual ministry incentive and the usual local government incentive is to take the public money I've got and spend it. And I've got to spend my public money because the next year I get the same amount plus a margin. And if I spend it well, I get plus. If I don't spend it well, I get minus. And it's that whole game of budget allocation, which is crazy, but that's the way it works, and that's the way it works globally. And so it's almost not in your interest, if you're a director of a department for infrastructure, it's almost not in your interest to bring in a private investor or to look at commercial debt or more structured solutions, because you want to spend your public money. And not only that, but we'll talk in a minute about the fact that if you want to do a PPP deal, you should take the best assets and do a PPP deal for those best projects, the easiest ones, the ones that make the most money, the ones that are going to move quickly, because then the cost of the private investment is lower. Now, if you finance it with public money, the cost of public money is the same. It doesn't matter if it's an easy project or a hard project or complicated project, right? But if it's private money, the easy project gets much cheaper cost of money than the hard project. So the logic, the right approach would be take all the easiest, simplest projects and put them in PPP. But from the incentives for your average infrastructure director is to use your public money on the easiest projects, because then I know I will spend my budget and I will get my budget next year. So it's really tricky for the people being asked to do PPP, and which is why globally, every country, usually and often the first projects are either way too big or way too complicated or difficult. All the hard projects get shoved into PPP, and they're more likely to fail. So I think you're absolutely right. You put your finger on one of the keys to local government actually achieving more in PPP is for central government and for local government to create incentives to deliver on that efficiency, on that financial efficiency, but also on service delivery efficiency. Now, how you do that is complicated, right? Changing all the way that you report, changing the kind of incentives and drivers on that budget function, but it's absolutely essential. So maybe I could talk a little bit about this. We were talking about the way people look at risk, the challenges that we have with risk allocation. And just to understand that this is a summary sheet from a typical financial model for a PPP deal. And you can see that in your typical greenfield, let's say we're going to build a new asset. We're going to build a new parking garage. And this is a very complicated parking garage. This is actually taken from a toll road. So let's stick with the road. I'm going to build a new toll road. So you'll see in the first part, in these first 4 years, the money is all going out the door. The money is all going into what, from a private sector perspective, is a big hole in the ground, right? Because until the asset is built, it's not worth anything. So you dump this money into this project, you build out the project, and it's only after the road is built that you start earning revenues. Now, if this is a parking garage, it's the same thing, right? The parking garage doesn't start earning revenues until it's built and you can start bringing in cars. So you're asking the private sector to sit on their money for a period of time until the construction is done. And that's good because it aligns interests. The private sector is incentivized to deliver that construction as quickly as possible and to a good quality, because they only get paid once revenues start flowing in, once the cars start using the parking garage, once the cars start using the road. And so that's where you see the jump up in revenues in year 5 and the slow increase. And parking garage will be the same thing. As you gain in momentum, as you gain customers, as you can slowly increase your tariffs, that's where you start gaining these returns. And that's where you start getting the dividend, the payback in debt is the first thing that comes out, right? And that's at the bottom with taxes, et cetera. But then you've got your equity return is at the top. And the equity return doesn't start coming out until you've started earning some real money. So not only is private sector waiting to year 5 to start earning money, but the real money only comes after year 10 in this model. Now, for a parking garage, it's going to be much simpler. It's going to be more complex, compact, more compressed. And so you'll be able to start earning back money early. But realize that when you've got this private partner, put yourselves in their position. Try to understand where they're coming from and the challenges that they're facing. And this is one of the difficulties. Now, don't feel bad for them, because during these first 4 years, there's a construction company, usually one of the investors, who is earning back a profit for the construction work done. There are different ways that private sector will earn money during this project, but realize that and the intention of PPP is that the private sector doesn't really get the big money until this project is a real success. And that way everyone's interests are aligned. So I'll split, and then these are the kind of risks that you need to think about. I won't go into detail on these, but we can come back to this later if you're interested. The type of risks in a given project and where they tend to fall out. Now this is very simple, super simplified. When you see your PPP agreements, they're going to be big, thick documents explaining who does what and when it happens, and so that this is all fleshed out in detail. And all of this will be shared to some extent. But generally speaking, private sector will ensure completion of the project, good operation of the project, protecting from environmental and social risks in the construction and operation of the project, and protect against the financing. So if the cost of financing goes up dramatically, or if something else happens on the financing front, if there are breaches in the financing so that you lose your debt, all of that stuff is managed by the private sector. The public sector tends to protect against things like regulatory risk, the legal environment, political risk, those things where government is closer to the issue, is able to manage it better, may be able to foresee things happening and therefore guard against them, those kind of things. And then these ones at the bottom are things that are generally shared between the public and private. And all of these things are, like I said, this is not cut and dry, but and past environmental risk, the pricing risk, the tolls and tariffs you can charge, the demand risk. How many people are going to use this parking garage once I built it? If the government offers the plot of land in the wrong place, then you won't get very many people coming to use the parking garage. So often that's split between public and private to figure out how you would manage that demand risk. And just to say again, partnership, partnership, partnership. These are 4 people in a boat. There's a hole in the boat and the boat is sinking. 2 of the guys are at the dry end of the boat saying, boy, I'm sure glad the hole's not in our side of the boat. And the other 2 are desperately bailing. As soon as the public or private starts to wrestle with the project and it has a problem, the other party cannot sit back and say, well, that's their problem, I don't care. This is your project, together, public and private. When there's a hole in the boat, everybody needs to get together, try to fix it. All right, I sent you module 19. I'm assuming everybody read it, right? You guys all read through module 19 in incredible detail. If I asked you questions about module 19, you'll be able to give me a quick answer. Module 19 describes a bit where the private sector is coming from and the issues that are important to them. So it's worth a run through and worth a reminder as you're preparing a project, as you're going to negotiate a project, just to remind yourself of the kind of issues that you need to prepare yourself for that the private sector is going to raise. Make sure that your project has either resolved them or that you know why you've not resolved them or how you would like the private sector to resolve them and what's important. Let's talk a little bit about money. We talked about revenue, and every PPP project needs to have a good revenue stream. There are obviously revenues from users. So in our parking garage example, you want to build an above ground parking facility. It's going to be 4 stories. It's in the downtown space, so it's a great location, but there's a huge problem with parking outside. One is you can charge people for parking in the facility. And that's great. I'm going to charge a fee and we figure out what the fee is. The fee will be linked with how much you're charging people to park on the road. Generally, when you build this kind of facility, the government also wants to remove some of the parking from the street so that you can reduce congestion and open up streets, right? So we don't have so much parking, and especially where there's illegal parking, there are all kinds of problems. But that means that government needs to be strong in enforcement. If government doesn't enforce in parallel, then the money that the private sector earns from the parking garage is going to be undermined. It's going to be undercut. But thinking about all those things, how can we make sure that the revenue stream is solid? And generally that is in the interest of the government as well as the investor. But then second, think about what else can we do with this structure to earn money? So one of the challenges for local governments is that we tend to think about an asset just for the function that it's the main function it's meant to deliver. So we only think about parking in the parking garage, but actually a parking garage downtown is a great opportunity. Let's build above that. Let's build offices. Let's build retail space. Or maybe the parking goes, I've seen that, which doesn't work as well, but maybe the parking then gets pushed underground because the ability to make money from building up is so valuable, and you can park underground without a problem. It's a little more expensive, but now the revenues from building on top of it compensate for the cost of the digging down, and that then increases capacity downtown. Now, don't forget that there are some challenges there, right? If I build a parking garage and then I build offices on top, I'm going to need to build even more parking spaces, because now the people in the offices will want to park in the parking garage. And if the parking garage is now just for the people in the office, we've defeated the purpose. But let's maximize the capacity, the revenue capacity of those assets by thinking out of the box. And this is where private sector is often very good. These are the things that they do. They think about ways to make money. Now obviously government needs to stay on top of this. It's not about allowing private sector to build whatever they want. It earns you a lot of money to build casinos. And so do we build casinos on top of every parking garage? No. Government wants to control where, if you allow casinos, and where you would allow casinos. Even here in Singapore, where I live, we have casinos, which amazed me when the government built casinos. But they've managed it really well. They've kept really tight to make sure that the spillover effect of a casino, and sometimes the other activities that tend to follow a casino, have been managed and maintained. And so all of those are really important parts of this. Government cannot just sit back and let private sector run with the commercial, but let the private sector be creative, give them the space, the opportunity to come up with lots of ideas, help them do this, because it's really powerful. And then finally, if none of that works, realize that government's going to have to step up. And so in some sectors, government tends to pay quite a bit of the bill. So in things like solid waste management, if you want a private company to come in, help you collect the garbage, help you bring it out to the facility, maybe do a waste to energy, maybe do incineration, maybe do a sanitary landfill and help manage that landfill, that's all expensive. And people tend not to pay very much for garbage collection. So somewhere in there, tax money is likely to have to make up the difference. And in some cases, a lot. And so this public, do not, I guess our advice would be aware that there is a potential, and in some cases a strong likelihood, that government is going to need to step up on the financial side going forward. And part of the calculation is, over the next 30 years, if government is going to pay for the service X, and here's the kind of level of payment that we think we'll need to make, is that affordable? Is it worth it for us? Is it value for money? Is this something that we want to do? Is there another way to do this besides PPP that would be better? And all of those questions need to be asked in the very beginning. Okay, so this is the same thing we just talked about. Think differently about assets. Be creative. Look at different sources of revenues. And here's a bus terminal in India. And bus terminals are great for this, right? Bus terminals for public sector is, oh my gosh, I've got to spend a bunch of money to build a terminal for a bunch of buses. And I'm going to charge the buses fees, but it's not going to make me that much money. So I have to put from my budget, I have to put a bunch of money into this. But actually bus terminals from a private perspective is a place where all the customers come. So let's pile in all these customers. They're coming to ride to ride on the buses. Let's provide them with shopping opportunities. Let's provide them with office space. Let's provide them with all these other facilities things that they can do. They've got to go to the bus terminal anyway to get where they're going. We might as well offer them all these services and at the same time earn money off of them and offer the services, lease, rental, etc. And so here's an example of a bus terminal, and it started out just assuming that the buses would pay the fees. And this is a long time ago, right? And India's gone just streets ahead. They've got so many interesting examples of really great approaches to using PPP very creatively. But this was a while back. And so the private operator came in. And of course, what happens when you charge buses fees for using the terminal? The buses stop down the street where they don't have to pay the fee. And they didn't pay the fee. And so the number of buses and the amount of fees, that the revenues that were collected, were much less. And so they had to turn back and start thinking creatively about how do we make money for this. And they looked at advertising revenue. They looked at shops and commercial rentals and all of those kind of things, services for the bus companies, for petrol and for other things, all those other things that you can do within that space. And so it just changes the nature of how you think about bus terminals, and depends on how people travel, who uses the bus terminal. My grandparents were immigrants from France to the United States. And when they first came over to the US, they went in with a bunch of people and they built a hotel on top of a Greyhound bus terminal. And in those days in the US, everybody traveled by bus because air travel was too expensive. So you had massive movement of people by bus, and you'd arrive in the city by bus. And what do? You want to spend the night someplace before you go on to your next location. And so the hotel worked really, really well. And so there are all these different opportunities there of uses of different assets. And obviously it's not just bus terminals. There's a public market in the Philippines. Government had to spend, they knew it was going to cost them 100 million pesos to build out the public market, which had burned down, and it had become a real blight in the city. It had attracted all kinds of, it was just a mess down there. But they didn't have the money to spend on it. So they brought in a private partner who came in, had a lot of ideas about the use of the space. They kept the low-cost vendor space so that the vendors that were using the public market previously for its usual purposes. But in addition, they had all of this commercial space that they added to it. And so instead of a cost to the government now earns a return on that space. And obviously this is a great location. Not every project is going to earn the city money, but there's a possibility that a revenue stream can be earned from some of these assets. Here is a school in Washington, D.C. And this now is one of the top schools. I lived in Washington for a long time. And if you can get your kid into the Oyster School, that's a great thing because it's bilingual, English, Spanish. It's got all the latest facilities. It turns out that 20 years ago, it was a mess. The school was dilapidated, it was falling down, they didn't have any facilities, and the city didn't have the money to spend on it. So the parents got together and with the city, with the school district, and they brought in a private investor. The school was in a great part of town, so they cut the lot in half. They built an apartment building on one half and the school in the other half. The private property developer that built the apartment building used the profit from that to spend on the school and built this beautiful school with all the latest facilities and everything. And now it's become this amazing school. Also in Washington, D.C., this is a library and a fire department. And again, falling apart. What do you do with it? Don't have the money. But again, it's in a decent part of town. And so on top of the library, they built high-priced condominiums. And in exchange for the property developer for the right to build these high-priced condominiums, the property developer built this beautiful new library with all the latest facilities and gorgeous, and then redid the fire station with all the latest modern technology. And on top of the fire station, built low-cost housing. Now, there was some public money that went into the low-cost housing to balance out the difference because the amount of profit from the condominiums wasn't sufficient. But the city got all of this wonderful new infrastructure in exchange for development rights over the top of the library. Here's one where this is from India again, and there's a food program that the government manages. So the government, in this case, grain, is moved around India and stored in these silos that the government runs. And so the government did a PPP project to bring in a private operator to come build brand new silos and manage the silos. And because the government had done the analysis of the wastage that they were experiencing from the silos that were government run and realized it was way better to have a private company come in. And there was sufficient increased efficiency that paid for the difference. So the reduction in loss was sufficient to, and the reduction in cost from government of running these silos was sufficient to pay the fee that the private sector then earned to run the silos. And so this is purely government payment to a PPP operator, but on balance, it was value for money for government. Same kind of thing for street lighting. And this is a very popular one for PPP. If you're putting in, long-term, low energy bulbs, the private operator comes in, puts in these low energy saving technology, and so you've got your new street lights, but the government can pay the operator based on the reduction in electricity usage. So there's a lot of value to be had from that. In Nairobi, we did a street lighting project. Not so much on energy saving, but on advertising. And so the operator was allowed to put a advertising on each pole And the revenues from that, plus all the rest, was sufficient to cover the cost of the new streetlights. Rooftop solar, the same idea, right? Especially for municipal government offices. There are usually a lot of rooftop space on these office buildings. The offices use electricity during the day when the sun is out and solar generation. And so it makes a lot of sense to put solar panels up and then to buy the electricity from the private operator that brings in the solar panels. And that cuts down the cost of electricity for the municipal government. Now, we tried this, actually, Abhijit and I tried one of these in Tanzania. The problem was that the local government never paid for their power. So that didn't quite work. But if the city is paying for its electricity, and the solar can come in cheaper and more convenient and very green, then the advantages are often sufficient to justify these kind of PPP deals. So I've been talking for a really long time. Any questions? So shall I pause for just a minute and ask and give time for questions? I think that what we're going to do next is I'm going to do a very quick run through our project concept assessment, which was module 2 that you guys looked at. And then Abhijit is going to give us 2 case studies that he's worked on, that he knows well. And then you can see how the issues that are brought out in the project concept assessment apply to these projects, but also think about your own projects and whether they satisfy some of these criteria, where they might need more work, and what lessons you can learn from the projects that Abhijit is going to explain to us. So any other questions that we've got at the moment, or should I run through this quickly and then hand over to Abhijit? Sorry, just running through my text to see if there's anything else.
So far, there's no question, Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that mean everyone's fallen asleep? Someone send me a smiley emoticon. Something. Send me a chat. I'm feeling lonely. It's actually raining in Singapore, which is really beautiful, but it is a bit sad. Ah, good. All right, someone's awake. All right, we've got 3 people are awake. That's good. Fantastic. So let me run really quickly through this project concept assessment. And again, really basic tool. The idea of all of this, the toolkit that we provided, is to try to keep things as simple as possible, right? So we're not overdoing it. We're not, a lot of times PPP programs are focused on the massive national projects, that your own toll road program, which is huge, but way too complex for something that your average local government would want to undertake. And so we've tried to simplify it, but still keeping the safeguards within it. And please do, if you read through it, as you go through it, you notice problems or errors or things that aren't clear, please let us know, because we will constantly update this thing and try to keep it going. So here's our concept assessment. Very, very simple questions. Why are you doing the project? And sometimes we don't ask ourselves that. Someone told me I needed to build a parking garage. Do you really need to build a parking garage? And the statement, the mayor told me to, does not help with private investors. That's not enough. They need more than that. So you need to explain how it fits into the local economy, to the local community. Why are you doing this project? Is there a good legal basis for it? Are there any legal constraints? And this probably not, but look at the question, because you will be asked and you need to be able to respond. And obviously you want the private investor to do its own work, its own due diligence, but you'll need to respond and give them some sense of whether there are any legal constraints. What's it going to cost, and how long is it going to be there? How long will the project last? And again, early days, but just to get a back of the envelope, test yourself on this. Why do you think it'll cost that much? What is the basis? And there are a lot of, in the construction industry, there are a lot of basic mechanisms for identifying unit costs of things. And so you should be able to get a back of the envelope capital expenditure assessment. How are you going to pay for your costs in preparing the project? And this is an interesting one. The private investor is going to be curious about this, but only some of them will be sophisticated enough to really ask. Because it's often the case that government gets excited about a project and comes out and starts preparing things and then realizes that it's expensive and it takes time. And if you want good people to come in and help you do this project, then that's going to cost some money. So having an idea of where you're going to get the money to pay for the cost of preparing this project is worth doing at the very beginning of the project. The financial dynamics of the project will be key, right? We already talked about capital expenditure. You're going to have to look at operating expenditure. You're going to have to look at sourcing of materials and all that kind of stuff to understand the cost implication, tax implications, etc. Demand is really important. Who's going to use this thing? Is there sufficient demand for the services? Now, even if government pays, if the people don't use the facility, if there's no benefit to the society, then the private sector, the private investor will be vulnerable, as will government, of course. But government can explain it away or wait till the next government comes in. But private sector is stuck there. And so if there's not a real desire by the people to use this facility or demand for the kind of services that you want, then you've got to question, is this the right project? And certainly not the right one to do with PPP. And what are the revenue sources? How robust are those revenues? How certain are they? What happens if there's a global pandemic and nobody goes out of their house for months at a time? And obviously those are extreme ends of the spectrum, but even that, ask yourself those questions. What do we do if things go wrong? Are we willing as government to step in and make up the difference? Because you'll probably have to. And so what do we do with those revenues? And then the private sector is going to want to be comfortable that you've got all this, you've thought about all this, and that you prepared it. Next is technical. We talked a little bit about technology and what kind of technologies that you want, but let's start from the beginning. Where's the site? Where's the dirt on which you're going to build whatever this is? Or is there an existing facility and you're going to take that existing facility and expand it or improve it or whatever it might be? Who owns the site? Who owns the land? How are you going to get access to the land? How long is that going to take? The number of projects where government is so confident that they will get the land that they go ahead and bid out the project, the private investor comes in, financing is closed, and then whoops, land is not available. But you know who pays? Government. Because the government is responsible to bring the land in these kind of deals. It may be that you want the private sector to bring the land, in which case think about the challenges that's going to raise for the private sector. How much more is it going to cost the private sector to get access to the land? How long is that going to take? What's the likelihood that they fail, that they're not able to get access to the land? Second is the technology and the concept. Has this been done? Who's done it? How successful was it? Are you sure this is the right technology? Why are you limiting it, if you're limiting it to a particular technology? And a lot of times, consultants or companies will come to the city and propose a technology. Say, oh, we use this in our project in China or our project in India or our project in the United States. It worked so well. Here are the results. You want to use this. Isn't this great? One reason why they're coming to you with this idea is that you will put the project out using that technology, and that company is the only company with that technology. Or they're consultants to the company that has the technology. And maybe you don't actually need that technology. Maybe that technology isn't very good. Has it been tried in more than that one place? I used to work a lot in Africa, and oh my gosh, the number of people that come to Africa with solutions that work in the US or Europe, but just aren't appropriate for Africa. Now, Malaysia is totally different. What works for Malaysia? What is right for your city? Not just because it's got bells and whistles and shiny and exciting, not just because the person that came to sell it to you has a beautiful batik shirt and looks impressive and has his reading glasses on his head and is clearly very intelligent, but because the solution is the right solution and it fits you and it's been used in places that are similar to you, to your needs, to your requirements. And environmental and social, and this question will come up very early on. What are the likelihood of environmental damage? How are we going to manage the prospect of potential environmental damage?
Hi, Jeff. Can I interrupt you?
Sure, please.
We have given access to Farhana to speak. Farhana Liana? Farhana, can you hear me? Ada. Basically, her message is some of the project with the community involved where there is no earning money, such as composting program, but it's a two-way project as we can save costs to collect domestic rubbish and prolong landfill area. Would you, or in your opinion, is a good project, and how can we elaborate so that municipal council can attract more money in this project?
Yeah, landfill is a fascinating one and challenging, as you said. I mean, no matter who does it, public or private, it's challenging. Often private sector is very good at managing landfill. And we found this in various countries, that the private sector can bring interesting technology and methodologies to manage landfill well, to deliver sanitary landfill, to use incineration and composting and recycling and other things to reduce the amount of landfill. Those kind of things, very technological, methodological. The private sector is quite good at, and what's the phrase? You know, when you'll have communities will collect the waste and bring it to one point, and then you'll have a trunk collection where you've got the big trucks come through, collect, and by using the big trucks, you reduce the cost of fuel, you reduce environmental impact, you make it easier to manage on the other end. So it's often better to have a big trucks doing the trunk collection rather than a bunch of little trucks. And so there are a lot of roles in there for private sector that are very helpful. But there are a couple of huge challenges. One is the gate fee. So even if you're doing a waste to energy or something like that, the revenues from the energy are going to be very small. So there's going to need to be a payment from government, and some of that payment is collected from the community, but not very much. And so you're going to have to figure out what that gate fee is and how it's measured. The second is this collection process. So the more I'm efficient at collection, at composting and recycling and those kind of things, often there are whole communities of waste pickers. There are all kinds of different people engaged in different pieces of this. But there's some really great systems that have been done, not so much necessarily through PPP, but often with community organizations or NGOs or public or government organizations that bring people together, so that same community that lives off of this waste collection has a new source of revenue and income, but at the same time also improves the efficiency and reduces the landfill. And so a lot of that can work together. So it's a more complicated PPP because you're adding in different pieces and elements, and it requires some government in the middle. But there's some great examples of this in different parts of the world. But it is tricky. I hope that was okay. Just text me again if I missed anything. And the last thing, both environmental and also social, and the waste example is a great one. Whatever project you do, there's going to be an impact on the local community. And there's a tendency, both by government but also by private, to go in and start building your project because I've got my contract, I'm going to go build this thing, I'm going to start building. And it's only after you start building that you realize that the community around that facility has a different view of things. And in some cases, this can be disastrous for the project. It can be massively time-consuming and costly because the community is right. What you're doing doesn't fit. and the community is being impacted in a way that's not appropriate. There's also the counter argument that, and we've got this as in one of the modules as well in community engagement. And there's a whole big study that we've done with IFC on how to do this. But community engagement can be very powerful. If you work with the community, they can help you think through, how do you design this project? They can help you think through, is this the right solution, the right way to do things? That's where you're gonna, hopefully that's where you're gonna get a lot of your labor, where you're gonna get a lot of your support, at least during construction, if not during operation. So it makes sense to engage closely with community to make sure that they're on side, but also to get their feedback, their advice, so that your project is better thought through, better conceived, and better designed. The fourth is legal. We talked about this. What are the legal constraints? And not just, is there a law that says you can't do this? Is there a law that says you can do this? Is there a regulation around this? What are the structures? Is there a does the contracting agency, the city, have the right to sign this contract? Sounds odd, but the private sector will want to make sure that the city has the right to deliver the service, the right to sign the contract, the right to provide a concession of the service to a private company, the right for the private company to collect the money. There will be lawyers all over these things to advise you and to help you make sure that you don't get anything wrong. Much better to ask those questions now than to find out a couple of years from now after the thing is built and you're not allowed to use it, or you've got to fix everything, or et cetera, et cetera. And also the institutional framework. Who approves things? Who decides things? Not only afterwards during implementation, but also during the contract period, during the procurement. How does all this happen? And you want to ask those questions in advance. And then finally is miscellaneous. And this is, a whole bunch of other issues about, is the private sector interested in this thing? What are the kind of liabilities that are going to arise with government? There are a bunch of other things, and that just sort of fill in the gaps around why private sector would think this is a good project and why government would think this is a project.
Jeff, Zainal Abdul Hamid, he have a question.
Great.
Okay, Zainal, you can speak. We have given you access. Yes, Zainal. Zainal, do you...
Dia suruh buat KM dia kan? Dia kat 7. Rasa tak nak baca. Dia sebut. Kat sebab tu kat 7 betul kan?
Zainal, do you have a question, Zainal?
Kasih suruh masa hantar pemenang.
I think he wrongly unmute. All right, Jeff, sorry. I think he accidentally raised his hand.
No worries, no worries.
Please carry on.
That's a perfect stopping point, because I wanted to hand over to Abhijit now, and that they've had to listen to me for way too long. So, so if you could swap over the sharing from me to Abhijit, please.
Yes, sure. You can stop sharing, and then we'll give access to Abhishek. Yes.
All right, I am stopping sharing. So the Abhijit is going to give the presentation on these two case studies, which will be
sorry, Jeff.
Really helping.
Before you hand over to Abhijit, I have two questions for you from the participant. Okay, first from Alex. What is the best practice in conducting pilot projects? This is to minimize risk, and if things don't go well, costs are limited.
So the perceived wisdom on pilot projects is you want something. If it's too big, it will be too complicated and too expensive. If it's too small, no one will care enough about it to make it happen. And so you want something medium-sized and simple, right? Because the first project is always most difficult. You've got a lot of learning to do. You've got to get everything lined up, all the institutions and all the rest. And so you're much better keeping things as simple as possible. That said, very few countries pay attention to these rules, and they tend to start with massive projects or complicated projects. But it's much better to keep things as simple as possible in a sector that's mature, in an area that you know that investors are interested in. And you can do all of that assessment very easily before you select that project.
All right, the second question from Shafi'i Taib. Partnership works well when private sector technology and innovation combine with public sector initiative to complete work on time and within the budget. What is the best point under the SDG goal 17, the 17th goal of SDG, to convince the private sector?
Sorry, what's SDG 17? Which one is that?
There's a 17 goals in SDG.
Oh, all 17 goals.
Yes, yes. So he's asking which one would be the best point to convince the private sector from SDGs.
Oh gosh, I mean, yeah. So from my experience, private sector is very interested in the SDGs, and that's very important for them. But at least for me, I would rather develop a PPP that not only meets the SDGs, but also meets the financial goals of the private investor. So I want something that everybody's going to be happy about. It's a bit like when we when we make a dinner at home and finding something that everyone's happy about, and usually there's a bit of compromise. Nobody gets exactly what they want, but everybody's happy because it's a good meal. So it's that balance between them. So I don't think there's any perfect, easy route through that, or any particular one of the SDGs that's stronger than the others as far as bringing it for private sector. But it's that balance. It's important.
All right, that's about the end questions. Thank you, Jeff.
Great. In which case, may I introduce you to Abhijit Baumik. Over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. Good morning again. So I am actually going to take a deep dive into two projects that I worked on. And you will see that many of the issues and challenges that we faced implementing these projects are things that Jeff has referred to. So it in a way kind of reinforces some of the same issues, some of the same challenges, some of the positives of doing these projects in a PPP structure. Secondly, fortunately or unfortunately, I think both of these projects got referred to. So there was a bus terminal example that Jeff had, and then there was a question on the municipal solid waste management. So hopefully I'm going to run through these a little quicker because you have a bit of a background. So let me start off with the bus terminal project. The one that Jeff pointed out in a city was something that I had done, but this is another city which probably worked a little better than the one that the example that Jeff picked up. So let's start off looking at the bus terminal. And one of the first things that we talked about, when Jeff said that, you need to ask yourself the question, why do you want to do the project? And one of the first things really is to look at the city that we worked in. They looked at the existing bus terminal that they had and said, what's the challenge that they were facing? And these I've seen as typical challenges that a lot of the cities face with their bus terminals. So the city over time has grown in a certain manner where the bus terminal, which was designed 20, 30 years back, is no longer the appropriate location, and you want to relocate it at some point that makes more sense. So relocation of the bus terminal because of time often becomes the reason why you want to look at that. The second is, in many cities, the commercial areas of the city usually grew in and around the old bus terminal. So that whole bus terminal area became very, very congested. And given the number of buses in the city that we are talking about was getting 1,400 buses a day into the terminal. So imagine 1,400 buses coming in, and then, sorry, Jeff, did you say something about my camera?
Your camera is down to your left.
Okay.
There, where your hand is, your left hand. It was on the camera. So if you
Okay.
look, yeah, exactly. If you look down there,
Yeah.
look down at your left hand.
Minimize my self video.
No, look down at your left hand. Your
Yeah.
physical left hand. There, that's us. Now you're looking at us.
Oh, okay. 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 Thanks.
Sure.
So, so you know, it's getting congested with the 1,400 buses, the number of passengers, cars and taxis coming in to drop the passengers, pick up the passengers. So high congestion is often a point where people start looking at wanting to do a different bus terminal, right? And also, many of the older bus terminals have been not necessarily planned and designed the way that you would do, where the circulation plan of how the bus is coming in, how the bus is going out, where is the pedestrians walking, is there safety, in place, etc. So they were not originally so well planned, and sometimes it gets tricky. So you want to look at a new bus terminal. And finally, many of these older bus terminals, given today's standards, do not have adequate passenger amenities, washrooms, restaurants, little hotel rooms, and so on and so forth, that today, for instance, is very essential for users and bus passengers that earlier may not have been adequate. So these were the typical challenges in the city that we were looking at, and the city said, can we have a new bus terminal? They had located a different site, and the city was growing in that direction, so that site made more sense. And we started looking at what is the kind of a bus terminal that we really want. So the objectives, which is really going back, saying one, of course, was to relocate the bus terminal to cater to the growth of the city. City was growing in that direction. But secondly, I think what we really did was sat around the table and saying, what is the kind of a bus terminal that we want to develop? Of course, it had to be state of the art, it had to be world class. But I think two things that came out very clearly in interactions that we had with the users, with the municipal officials and everybody else, was that passenger safety has to be paramount. So, that was something which is the pedestrian passenger safety was the number one parameter that we wanted to build into the design. And the second was significantly better passenger services and amenities so that more and more people start using those buses compared to taking their private cars and so on and so forth. And the third element was that the municipality recognized that if they were to build it themselves and operate the bus terminal, which is what they were doing with the older bus terminal, they may probably not ensure the quality of delivery of services to the extent that they really wanted. So it wasn't just about building, but it was more important of continuing to deliver a certain quality of service over the 10 or 15-year period that we were looking at this PPP contract. And that really was the key. The municipality itself kind of said, listen, if we do it, some of these standards are going to drop. But if we get the private sector to do it, we can ensure that the delivery of services. And that more often across PPP projects is the key driver, which is on a continued basis, are we delivering a great quality of service? So those were the kind of objectives with which we started developing the bus terminal, right? And then when we started looking at breaking that further down, we said, okay, what are the key components? One, because passenger safety was number one, we wanted to make sure that the design kind of, let unobstructed movement of the buses. Now, to do that, we needed a lot of information. And this is about preparing a project, understanding a project, not only in saying, I want a bus terminal that caters to 1,000 buses, or in this particular instance, 1,400 buses. That doesn't help. I need to know every hour or every half an hour, what are the number of buses coming into the terminal? Why? Because we realized in this particular one, between 8 in the morning to 9 in the morning and between 5 in the evening and 6 in the evening were the peak times when you had the number of buses. So the design of the bus terminal had to cater to the peak hour of when the maximum number of buses and the maximum number of passengers were going to be. So we had to design the facility to that level. Second, we also had to make sure, because again, passenger safety, where were the passengers maximum coming in, what time, of course, and also from what direction. So there were 2 entries and exit points into this bus terminal. At what point, where were they coming in from, where were they getting out from? And therefore, we had to design it to ensure that worked. Similarly, we had to figure out, okay, the buses are moving in a particular way, coming in and getting out of the terminal in a particular direction. How were the passenger vehicles going to move? Where would they come and drop the passengers? How would the passengers get from the point to where they were getting dropped to where they were going to get into the buses? So as much in detail as we can get into and understand all of this, the better the project gets designed. Again, from a municipality point of view, putting it out, saying this is what we want in terms of the project. Just moving one further step into the detail, is really saying, okay, we then got into designing. Okay, this is probably, we take much longer to explain the exact design, but the short point that I wanted to make was that we made sure that the passenger and the bus movements were at different levels. So think of a little like an airport, where when you enter an airport, you actually go up on a ramp and enter the airport terminal building at a level that is not the same level where the airplanes are parked. It's not at the apron level, but 1 or 2 levels above. So the passengers coming into the terminal will come in at the terminal building a level higher up. That's where they buy the tickets. That's where they wait. That's where the passenger amenities are, the shops, the restaurants, everything are at that level. And there are several bus bays that level is connected to. When your bus is about to leave, on your board, electronic board, you see the bus going to, whatever city. You see that's your bus. You go down the flight of stairs, get into the bus. And similarly, when the bus comes, the passengers exit, go to the higher level and get out. Now that ensured that where the buses were moving, there was not a single passenger on that level, which drove this whole element of saying, we want to sterilize the passenger movement completely from a safety point of view. The second element that we did was there were long route buses. These were buses coming in from other cities, coming in to the bus terminal, and then there were short routes, so people were getting off, taking another bus that would take them to some other points within the same city. So we wanted to segregate that. And we wanted to have a clear plan of where the private vehicle movements are going to come, how the private vehicles are going to move. So where are they going to come and park? How is the passenger, where is the passenger going to get off? How is the passenger getting off from there and getting into the higher level as we want, et cetera, et cetera. So as you would see, there is a lot of planning that goes into designing even a simple thing like a bus terminal. It's not just about bus bays, bus coming and stopping, people getting out, people getting off and in. So this is, based on your objectives, you get into designing a bus terminal. And in this particular one, because the design was so critical to the municipality, we actually got the best design team, the architect and a traffic flow design expert in to design a bus terminal. And we took that design to the market to attract the PPP developers to say, you deliver me this particular design. This is what I really want. So the design was actually frozen. It wasn't something that we went to the private partner and say, you help me design this. Okay, Jeff talked about revenue streams. Every project needs to have revenue streams, and it's really important. So the primary revenues from a bus terminal were really a mix of 2, which is the fees or the terminal fees that the bus paid as it entered a bus terminal. And the second was all the commercial revenues that you could get. Lease rentals from the revenues, lease rentals from the bus companies that you would have ticketing offices, lease rentals from the shops that you could put up. But I think the key one here was that we wanted to make sure that the only commercial development and the commercial fees that we charge was limited to delivering passenger benefit. So you wouldn't put up, let's say, a multiplex theater in a bus terminal, because that would attract other people who are not getting on a bus into the bus terminal. And we were very conscious of the fact that 1,400 buses coming into this terminal on an average 40 to 45 passengers per bus, that's a lot of people coming in within the 10 hours of the peak business. right? So we wanted to deliver certain passenger amenities and services, yes, but no more that would attract in people from outside. And of course, there were other revenue sources like parking. There was advertising revenues because it was a high footfall place, a lot of eyeballs for advertising revenues, advertisers to come in there. And putting all of this together, we realized that the project could actually deliver returns to a private sector player, which was very reasonable. And one of the ways we measure reasonability at a very early stage is to look at what the private developer's cost of money is going to be. In here, I've used an acronym of a weighted average cost of capital, but what is his money going to cost him? And can we give him 4, 5, 7, 6% higher than his average cost of capital to make it interesting for him to take all the risks that he's taking by running this? Let me just delve one more minute into this choice that we have between revenues from bus terminal, which is the user charges that the buses pay, and the commercial. Now, I've changed other currency into ringgit, so don't look at the specific numbers, but it's just to make the point. So for instance, if you look at buses paying per trip fee of 10 ringgits, right, there is a certain terminal per bay revenue that you get, which works out to 120,000. The per bay cost that I need is 385,000, so I'm negative 265,000. Then I say, okay, that is what I need to cover up to get to my 4 or 5% higher than the cost of capital to the private sector. So then I look at what is the commercial space that I need to be able to build to give the private sector an attractive financial return. And let's say in the place that we are looking at, if the lease rental could be 20 ringgits per square foot per month, or 30 or 40, it gives me a different number. So let's say if it was 30 ringgits per square foot per month, I would have to build 736 square feet of leasable commercial space for this project to make it attractive. So when I take this project to the market, as the municipal government, I need to say, this is what you as the private developer can charge to every bus that's coming in. So let's say in my example, 10 ringgits every time the bus enters. And I will allow you to build, let's say a maximum of 750 square feet of leasable commercial space. And in addition, you will build washrooms, X number of washrooms. So I define the boundaries or the parameters of the project, which is what I'm really looking at. So this is the extent of preparing a project before you take a project to the market. So when the private sector is coming in and wanting to work with you on the project, very upfront, they clearly know what is it that you desire, what is it that the municipal really wants, what is it that he will have to build. And what I haven't got into as yet here is also we had a whole bunch of what is the service level and what is the service standard we expect the private sector to deliver. But I'll come to that. Now on this project, the kind of PPP structure, Jeff talked about the acronym. So this was a build, operate, transfer, but actually it was build, finance, operate, maintain, transfer. I am again a non-believer of acronyms. You need to be able to say, what is it that you want the private developer to do? What is it that you as the municipality will do? Once you have that in place, we can evolve any structure that you want. For instance, the first time there was a project that I was working in, and I went to the municipal government that said, we're going to develop this project as a bomb. It was build, operate, and maintain, and there wasn't a transfer. So you can develop and design whatever structure of PPP you want as long as the two objectives are clear. So here, as the municipality developer, the municipality prepared a comprehensive design and development plan and took that plan to the market. From the private sector point of view, what were the risks that he was looking at? And one of the key risks that he was looking at was really, would the buses pay me a fee, a terminal fee? And of course, the terminal fee was higher than what they were paying at the old bus terminal. So will they actually resist the hike in the terminal fee? And as a result of that, were they going to pick up passengers from the road outside rather than enter the terminal, right? So the risk of non-compliance. Now, these are the three risks that really the municipality will need to take on. So the municipality will have to say, I will enforce that buses enter the terminal, legally enforce that buses enter the terminal, because that is what the municipality really wants. It's highly unsafe to have buses stop in the middle of the road, creates congestion, etc. Here is a really nice facility that as a municipality, as a city, we are building. You want the passengers to come there. You've provided all the amenities, so you will legally enforce that, and you will, as a municipality, this municipality actually put it into the Motor Vehicle Act, which is enforcing the terminal fee that the buses would have to pay. So that was one. The second risk that the private sector saw was saying, as a municipality, you may develop an alternative facility, another facility that will compete. Because the cities are always growing, you need to think about this. This was a 12-year or a 13-year period that we were signing the contract with the PPP developer with. And to give him the comfort, we had to say that at least for the next 10 years, we are not going to build another bus terminal that will compete with this bus terminal. You will continue to get these 1,400 buses into your terminal. Now, whether it's 10 years, 7 years, but some such number so that he can see the revenue going ahead. And the third was that there was a road that was to be constructed that connected this bus terminal to the main road. Now, that again was the municipal responsibility, and private developers are very concerned where the entire project depends on the municipality building something before they actually have the terminal in place. And in this particular instance, we had the municipality build that project even before we went to the market, build that road even before we went to the market to bid it out. Finally, on terminals, I think municipalities for PPP projects really need to think, what are the kind of developers we want to, what are the kind of partners we want to target? And for these kind of projects, which are not very large, are not very capital intensive projects. I mean, this bus terminal was about $5.5 million, but I haven't seen any bus terminal anywhere that is beyond $7-8 million or something thereabouts. Depends on the number of buses, passengers, etc. that you get in, but they're typically between 2 million to 7-8 million. That's the range that I've seen. So at that capital intensity, the large contractors, the large developers are not interested. It's not worth their size. It's too small for them to be interested. We looked at the local industrialists, some garment manufacturers, some engineering bicycle manufacturers, and so on and so forth. They thought this project was too cumbersome on a daily basis to manage 1,400 buses, collect money from them, etc., etc. They weren't interested. What we did find, though, was that there were smaller regional and citywide infrastructure developers, construction contractors, builders. They were really interested in this project. They knew what the risks were. They knew what the city, how the city was growing, and they knew how to, address the risks. They knew, how the city would actually behave vis-a-vis the terminal fee payment, etc. And we really focused in on marketing this project or selling this project or getting the interest of these kind of developers to our project. And we also realized that because they were smaller developers, they were unwilling to spend too much money up front in designing, and it also worked well because the municipality wanted to design it themselves and ask the developers to deliver on that project. So that's really on the bus terminal. In terms of just taking you through a case, probably getting into a little of a deep dive. The elements of this that I haven't really covered really was how we went about designing the contract. And one of the key elements was trying to define the performance parameters of the private sector partners. So things like he has to allow a bus to enter and be at a bay within 2 minutes of the bus arriving at the gate of the terminal. He had to, have facilities such that the passengers would be able to get out of the bus within 7 minutes of the bus coming into a bus bay. He couldn't park at the bus bay for more than 15 minutes between getting the passengers out. And we even went down to specifying the quality of cleanliness of the washrooms, the kind of restaurants that you would have, and so on and so forth. So those were all elements which was quite detailed in terms of the performance parameters. And at the municipal level, we also set up a team supported by an external engineer who would go in and monitor whether these performance parameters were being delivered on a regular basis. I think we created it fortnightly to begin with, and then we moved monthly. Okay, so the next project that I have is the municipal solid waste, and the question is, do you, are there any questions related to this project? Maybe I can stop for a minute, and if there are any questions, Jeff, let me know. We could maybe take those questions and then move on to the municipal solid waste project.
There's no any question for now.
Okay.
Yep. No
Okay.
question yet.
So let me get to the second municipal project, which is a little different. And if you thought we were getting into a lot of detail on designing the bus terminal project, as the Americans would say, you ain't seen nothing. So when we get into a municipal solid waste project, I think the key thing here is really about getting into the details of waste management of a city. The project that we were looking at for the city was really an integrated municipal solid waste management. What that meant was that everything about solid waste management, right from primary collection to secondary collection to street sweeping, the city had some open drains, so open drain cleaning. There was secondary collection, which is from the households that comes to a bin, and then you have to take it off from the bin. So secondary collection, transportation. The land for the landfill that the city had identified was 42 kilometers away from the center of the city. So we built 2 transfer stations, which was smaller kind of sites where you transported it into the larger transportation vehicle. So you didn't have hundreds of smaller vehicles traveling 42 kilometers to the landfill site and back, but you had these big 12 to 18 ton compactors moving around. So the transfer station moved waste from smaller vehicles to the bigger vehicle. And then at the disposal, there was a processing unit. And this particular one did reuse derived fuel and composting, RDF and composting, didn't go into generating electricity. And I'll come back to why. And of course, the final that couldn't be treated go into a scientific landfill system. So the entire municipal solid waste system. The first challenge that we faced when we were designing this was, when you design something like this, you design it for 30, 35, 40 years, right? And one of the biggest challenges is, how do you begin to project the population of the city 30, 35, 40 years down the road? Because the population will drive how much waste the city actually generates, right? And how much, therefore, do you design the system for? How many tons per day of municipal solid waste do you design the system for? And I think we spent close to 2 or 3 months arguing with and discussing, not arguing, with various people to try and figure out a model of what this likely population was going to be. Then moving on, we realized as we got into the project that there were several kinds of waste that we couldn't possibly handle in this. For instance, dairy waste, medical waste, industrial waste required very different kind of handling and very different kind of treatment. Couldn't get put into the same system, so we had to design something separate in terms of a PPP contract for that. We couldn't put the two together. Then we came down to defining each one of the elements that I started off saying. So primary collection. So we decided it was going to be 100% door-to-door collection. Nobody would have to step out of their door and even go 20 meters to drop the waste into a bin anywhere. So we would do 100% door-to-door collection. And then you realize when we start designing that, you say that, okay, from households, it has to be between 8 in the morning to 11 in the morning. And then we said, okay, those are the number of households you have. Those are the number of kilometers of roads that you have where this has to be collected. So how many people do you actually need? Then you start looking at, okay, what vehicles would they use to collect? So we were between the larger roads, you can use a vehicle, which is an auto tipper. And for the smaller roads where the auto tippers are probably not very efficient and the more congested, you use a push cart, right? Secondly, when you get into the next thing was street sweeping. So we got into measuring, okay, how many kilometers of roads do you have? Where is it that we can have automated sweeping machines? I mean, the vehicles that automatically, where do you need brooms and push carts, which need to sweep the street? We then went into drain cleaning. Again, some cities need it. Some cities don't have any open drains, but this particular city did have. And then we again got into estimating, okay, now how many people do you need to clean, 1 kilometer, over what time, what other vehicles do you need? Then we got into markets to identify how many markets did you really have. And the markets continuously, for the hours that they're open, and in this city, they were open from about 8 in the morning to about 8 in the evening. So for 12 hours, there was continuous generation of waste. And we wanted to make sure that there was collected every couple of hours, because otherwise the markets start looking very dirty. Then there were bulk waste generators, hotels, restaurants, places like that, which needed small vehicles to go to specific identified bulk waste generators and collect their waste 2 to 3 times a day. So, transfer it. Okay, then we moved into, okay, once the waste was collected, they were put into small bins like the yellow ones that you see on the picture there, which was there at the end of every street. So it was, if I remember right, every 50 or was it 60 meters, there were one of these where the primary door-to-door collection guys would go and put the waste in these. And we had to design them, if I remember, it was 3.5 cubic meter design for each one of these, because that's what we estimated the number of households on an average, that is the amount of waste that will fill in one such bin, because you didn't want waste, kind of around the bin. You wanted all of it inside the bin. Okay, so the secondary collection was that there were these kind of vehicles, the dual loader placers, which would pick these bins up. And again, there were defined times for each street when these would get picked. They would pick them up. Then they would take them to the transfer station. The transfer station was a split level. So these dumpers would go up on the higher level and drop it into a larger truck at the bottom, the compactor truck. So that was what the transfer station did. And we had designed 2 in the city. So they would go to these 2 transfer stations, whichever was closer, and they would drop it into these large compactor trucks. And these large compactor trucks, which were 12 to 18 ton compact carrying capacity, would take the waste and make trips to the integrated treatment plant. So there were fewer trucks doing 42-kilometer trips rather than the smaller dumper loaders, hundreds of them, going around the city. And then we had an integrated treatment plant. And I'll come back to a point that Jeff raised. We left it open to what technology the private developer wanted, as long as he treated the waste. And we put 2 conditions. One, that not more than 15 to 20%, and finally I've written 15 to 20 here, but we agreed at 20. Not more than 20% of the total waste collected would go to the landfill, right? So whatever treatment technology you want to use, go ahead, but I don't want more than 20% of waste going to the landfill, so my landfill can last longer, because I had specific amount of land and I wanted it to last for as long as I could. Secondly, you had to use a technology that was already in operation. This was a project in a city in India that was already in operation in India for at least 3 years. So I didn't want, like the examples that Jeff was giving, I didn't want anybody bringing me a fancy technology from some part of the world that may or may not have worked in that part of the world that I wasn't sure whether it would work here or not. So we said, anything that you propose, you have to show us a operating facility in India that we can travel to. And in fact, of the 7 bids that we received, the municipal team that was evaluating the tender went to one site of each one of these developers and physically inspected an operational plant and spoke to that particular municipality, how long it's been operational, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the kind of integration.
Like access to Alex.
Anusha, go ahead. Okay. Anusha, was there a question?
Yes, sorry. The question is from Alex. Alex, do you want to speak or you want me to ask the question? All right, his question is, how do we structure a public-private partnership agreement to include separation of waste, organic or recyclable? Also, how do we encourage people to sort waste?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, and I was skipping it. It's something that we have tried across tons of cities. Basically, I think now, so let me answer the easier question first, and I'll come to the more difficult one later. So the easier one, there are enough technologies now available that actually segregates waste at the treatment plant. both, and they segregated across. First, the recyclables come out. So a lot of the cities would have people who are currently taking out all the recyclable that has some value and taking it. So the private developers typically get these kind of people and companies to come in through NGOs to come in and work and take out anything that's recyclable and has a value from any waste that reaches the treatment plant. They then have different layers of waste segregation. So they run the waste through a kind of a conveyor belt that has a magnet on top. So it takes off anything that's metallic. They then run it through a sieve that takes off. So they go through several such processes where they integrate segregation of waste into what they can treat and what they cannot treat. So there is technology now that actually helps you do that at the treatment facility. And the way for municipalities to handle it is to say, and what we did in this project is that we said up front to the private partner that we are going to give you unsegregated waste. You segregate it however you want. You treat it, but make sure that not more than 20% of the waste reaches the landfill, because I want to control how much landfill you use. So there is that available, and you can build that into the contract. In fact, you can build it into the upfront document that you share with the developers when you are going out to tender the project. The other and the more challenging aspect is getting citizens and getting households to segregate their waste. Cities that I have seen that have done that successfully have done it with huge amounts of communication effort by the leaders of the society, by the leaders of the city, the mayor, even level to the national government, like the president, prime minister coming out and showing their support. And it's sustained communication over time helps do that. But many cities I've also seen put that along with, okay, I'll come back to, there's a question on legacy contracts. I'll come back to that. But I've also seen is after some time, put some penalties on non-segregation. But those I've found very difficult to actually implement in terms of penalty, because at the point that you're collecting the waste, it's very difficult to look at whether the segregation is right or not right or what. But it's a sustained communication effort. It's a sustained, kind of citizens learning that, this is what they need to do. Okay, I suddenly looked at the clock and we are not doing very well on time. So how much more time do we have, Anusha?
About 10 minutes, but you can extend a bit more. I think should be okay. But before that, can I just ask 2 questions that I have from the audience?
Yeah.
Okay. The first one is from, Atira. How did you manage legacy contract if intervention were to happen while contract were in force? All right. And then there's another question.
Can I take that?
Yes, please.
Forget it.
Please.
Okay. So yes, there was one contract for primary collection for half the city, right? Which was really door-to-door collection, street sweeping, drain cleaning, and dropping the waste in these dumper bins, which were then collected by the municipality itself. So the secondary collection was being done by the municipality, and they were really taking it to a landfill, which wasn't a scientific landfill, and dumping the waste there. That was what existed when we started looking at the project. Fortunately for us, the contract that they had with the existing contractor was only a 2-year contract. When we got into the project, it was already 1 year was over. So we already gave him notice saying, after 1 year, we're getting into a larger project. So, your contract will not get renewed. But the more challenging question, which I had in a subsequent slide, but, we will take it, was, let me address it now, was that the other half of the city actually employed municipal owned staff for primary collection, for street sweeping, for drain cleaning. And that was really the more difficult challenge, because we couldn't get rid of, there were hundreds of people, I forget the exact number, but there were hundreds of people that were employed by the municipal. They were permanent staff of the municipality. And the interesting way we structured this project was that for the primary collection, right up to the transfer station. So this was actually two contracts. Let me just go to that slide. Actually, the way we structured it finally was that there were two contracts. This whole PPP was not one integrated contract. One was primary door-to-door collection into the secondary bin and then transferred up to transfer station. So at the transfer station, you weigh the truck and see that contractor, how much waste has he collected, delivered, and you were paying him a tipping fee per ton of waste that he collected and brought. And the second contract was for somebody who would design, build, operate, and maintain, finance, operate, and maintain the transfer station, do the bulk long-haul transportation with these big vehicles, the treatment plant, and the sanitary landfill site, right? And he was again paid a tipping fee, and then he would get revenue from selling the RDF and the compost. So what we did on the first contract, right, the PPP1, as I call it in this slide, was a 7-year contract, and we divided the city into 3 zones, where 2 zones were given to the private operator. And interestingly, the same private operator that had the 2-year contract emerged to be the winning private partner. He knew the city the best, he had the people in place, and he was a very competitive bid. So he won the 2 zones, and the city staff did 1 zone, and we implemented the same service parameters, the same performance parameters for the municipal staff as well as for the 2 zone. And I remember going back to the city about a year later, and it was really interesting how competitive it was and how the municipal staff wanted to prove that they were delivering and their zone was cleaner than what the private operator was doing. And it was really interesting because never before this kind of competitive situation existed. We kind of tend to, when we are working on developing the project, find solutions that suit the municipality, and it has to be that way. There are no cookie cutter solutions of this is how you do it. But this city, that is what worked. And depending on what existing contracts your city may have, Alex, we would just look at differently and try and fit that in, however it would. Anusha, the next question.
Okay, how do you offset the revenue from sale of recycle to the overall cost of service?
Okay, good that we're doing these questions, because what I'll do is just finish off the slides simultaneously. So typically how we structured this project was that, like I said, there were 2 PPP contracts. So the first PPP contract was really the primary collection, secondary collection, street sweeping, drain cleaning, and transport to the transfer station. You paid a tipping fee of X ringgits per ton that he got to the transfer station, right? And he was delivering to the PPP partner number 2, who was operating the transfer station. And this is useful because when the partner 2 is taking the waste, he's making sure that the PPP contractor 1 is not giving you things he shouldn't be collecting. So, I mean, in the municipal solid waste business, I've seen way too many ways of private partners trying to be cute and getting around. So they fill in rocks into these bins, so it gives them higher weight, so they get more, revenue per ton. But if there is somebody else who's monitoring that, will make sure that these things don't happen. So there was that. The integrated treatment facility, there was a certain cost to it for building it, and then there was revenues by selling the reuse derived fuel and compost, and the private partner was free to sell it wherever. And I remember the highest value for the compost was from tea gardens and the tea plantation. They were paying the highest value. Don't ask me why, and I don't understand that, but that's where they ended up selling a lot of the compost, and they were selling the RDF, which is like low calorific coal, to a lot of the industrial units in the neighborhood. And interestingly, the winning bid for the integrated treatment facility, they did not want any revenue or any payment from the municipality. It was feasible on its own. Now, not necessarily all of them are, but in this particular instance, between the tea garden and these boilers, I think they found interesting revenue sources. For the tertiary and the long haul transportation, the amount of waste that they were transporting from the transfer station to the integrated treatment facility, again, there was a fee, which was on a per ton basis. And for the landfill site, where we had said not more than 20%, there was another fee per ton of waste that they were transferring to the scientific landfill. So they were constructing the scientific landfill site. They were operating it cell by cell. As you know, that's how landfill sites get done. and they were managing the waste there. So there was a total tipping fee, which I've called TF here, which was in ringgits per ton. Interestingly, we then looked at what the municipality was spending before this PPP project. And I've called that CC, the cost incurred by the municipality per ton before this project. Now, this project had a whole bunch of service parameters. Earlier, when the municipality was running it pretty much on its own with a small contract, it wasn't necessarily 100% collection efficiency, et cetera, but the difference between the total tipping fee that the city would have to pay with this private contract and what they were actually incurring on a like-to-like, the difference was pretty small. So in terms of the outflow from the municipality, it was very little in terms of incremental. And interestingly, we also looked at the charges that they were charging, the households, the shops, and the bulk generators. And if you actually looked at the revenue, so the total tipping fee minus the revenue was actually, minus the incremental revenue was actually lower than what the municipality was actually spending on municipal solid waste to the city before the PPP contract. Okay, so I assume there are no more questions. I had a couple of more slides, but let me just go through one slide I think that I wanted to go through, which was the alternative PPP structures that we actually evaluated. And there were three that we actually looked at. I told you what we finally, the municipality decided to go with. But one of the first things that we looked at was the operations and maintenance contract, where we said, okay, you as the municipality design the whole system, buy all the equipment in, construct the transfer station, construct the treatment plant, and so on and so forth. And get a private operator to come in and operate this. The challenge with this, while that was good because sometimes municipalities are able to raise money lower than what the private operator would cost its money, so that may be more efficient, and the municipal can get the best engineering resources to come and design this whole system. But the challenges were in such a contract, when you bring in a private operator, he comes in and starts blaming the design and the construction and how it's inefficient, and because of which I can't deliver the specifications or the standards that you're expecting me to, is pretty standard, usually happens by end of month one. Secondly, when the private sector puts in his own money, he is far more committed to the project, skin in the game, as the Americans would call it, far more committed to the project, and he ensures that everything runs very efficiently. Third, the profile of companies that we would get if you ran an O&M would be the smaller service kind of companies, guys who are good at bringing people in, but are not that innovative on technology, are not that great at being able to look at marketing the output, the RDF and the compost, etc. And finally, the roles are not necessarily aligned to the strengths. The municipality's strength is to be able for regulation, for policy, for some of these kind of things, not necessarily in designing, construction, and operating such plants. So we decided not to go with this. The second one, which is again something that municipalities are very attracted to, is just give one contract to one private operator, and that's all. I don't need to do anything about it anymore. I am done. So an integrated design, build, finance, operate, transfer, just have a clean city. I don't have to do anything. Now that more often than not, doesn't work, because municipalities have to continue its role, like Jeff talked about, of being a partner to the private operator, and more importantly, ensuring monitoring, ensuring that this private operator delivers. But the biggest challenge, biggest risks that we saw, and the municipality saw, and the citizens saw, is what if this private operator one day or for 5 days decides not to function? Can you imagine? And the city had about 370 tons of waste daily. Can you imagine 370 tons of waste not being collected, not being transported for just 3 days? And the whole city will come to a standstill. So we didn't want to design a system where one contractor handled the entire waste of the entire city and could hold that city to ransom. That was not something that the municipality, the citizens, or anybody was comfortable with. So we broke that. We broke that into 2 contracts, and even in the primary collection, we had 2 zones with a private contractor, but we had 1 zone with the municipal staff itself, which already existed. So there was always possibility to take over if there was a problem. Yeah, I had a couple of more slides, but we can probably cover them on the next sessions and so on and so forth. So I'm going to come to my terima kasih slide.
Abhijit, I have one question from Shafi'i Talib. Limit the amount of waste for each house or building based on the amount of annual tax payment need to pay to the local council if it exceeds the allowable limit. What is your opinion?
Okay, so it is a very interesting concept where, you know, like you have the concept of polluter pays, right? Which is the standard concept. So if you generate more waste, you pay more. So you can definitely do it across, for instance, the slide that I showed you, the shops were paying more than the households. The bulk generators like hotels and restaurants would pay more than the households. Within the households, again, there was a range of fees, but the way we had looked at range of fees collected was more by the size of the house. It was very difficult to implement a structure where you would weigh the amount of waste on a daily basis that a household gave you. That was difficult to implement. So we said, okay, if there was a larger size of the house, then that was indicative of more waste getting generated, and therefore they paid more. But once you decided on what they were paying, it was a fixed fee per month. So let's say houses of 1,000 square feet paid 10 ringgits a month, houses of 3,000 square feet paid 20, houses of 5,000 square feet paid 50 ringgits a month or something like that. But once that was done, that was fixed. And then every 3 years, I remember we had an escalation of 10%, if I remember that right. So that's how we had, to a certain extent, address the question of if you generate more waste, you pay more. Okay, so there was a question on how do you want to handle this, Jeff? That I see a question on waste collection from hotels.
Yep, and then there's one. Why don't you do the waste collection from the hotels? Let me read the second one.
Okay. So I think you'll have to tell me a little more of what this project, PPP project, you're looking at structuring, because just collection of the waste from the hotel pays a certain revenue. I assume he then takes it and drops it somewhere to a treatment plant, or is transportation his problem as well, or does he take it to the landfill or whatever he does? But yes, I assume you could, if there is more revenue based on what the hotels are paying, again, that is a tariff. I assume the municipality will fix that each hotel, based on the size of the hotel or whatever, would pay a certain revenue per X number of ringgits per month. And then this private operator is collecting that. Usually I have seen there is greater efficiency. Okay, so let me try and rephrase. You know, I don't know how large the kind of private partner you're going to get, but you don't want the private partner in revenue share mechanisms. The private partner tries to be quite innovative from an accounting point of view in how much revenue he shows. Now, as a municipality, is always very difficult to get behind his books to saying what is his revenue, what is his cost, etc. So my usual advice is for a municipality to take a fixed fee, right? Which is, you know, X ringgits per month or X ringgits, you know, whatever is built in there. So if you freeze two elements of it, so if you freeze how much a hotel is going to pay and how much he's going to pay to you, the private operator will work out his math in between that. And that will also drive him to have higher collections. If there is a tough, so there are some tricky questions behind this, and which is why I said you need to understand, I need to understand a little more of the project. So what happens to hotels that don't necessarily pay what you're asking them to pay? Does their waste not get collected? What if they do a delayed payment? You know, so these are all the kind of things that I think you need to get into when you're designing that contract.
So that addresses the second part of that question, because the other model is that the government just pays a fee to the operator, and then the government collects from the hotels. And then government then takes collection risk, which is challenging, but maybe the hotels are more likely to pay government than they are to pay the private sector. You need to think about that. You need to think about the cost of revenue collection. Is it cheaper for the private sector to do it or for government to do it? And then the underlying incentives for the private sector, are they going to be as efficient if they're receiving a fee from government as compared to receiving a fee from hotel, and the hotel might withhold their payment if they're not getting good service, whereas it's harder for government to monitor that service. So it's a complex series of questions, and you'd need to understand a bit better the dynamic of the relationship between the municipality, the nature of the operator, their relationship with the hotels, and the likelihood of hotels to pay, the leverage that the government has over the hotels. The next question asked was about where a project involves government providing land and the private sector finances whatever the development is, mixed use, for example, is that a PPP? And I think that for me personally, I take a very broad view of what is PPP, just because the principles that we're talking about apply to all kinds of different projects. So it doesn't help to delineate very strictly what is PPP. Your legal framework will, however, it will have a very specific definition of what is PPP. So I can't respond under Malaysian law, but I would count that as PPP. And I think there are a lot of the principles that we're talking about that can help you get more out of those kind of arrangements. So when government provides land and then private sector builds on that land and does whatever it does, how do you drive the private sector to deliver well, to work together with the government, to get better efficiency, to get better service delivery, and also to include, a lot of governments provide land because it's easier for government to acquire the land, and then provide land to developers for commercial or residential. There are mechanisms to ensure that the private sector, when developing that land, includes public services. And that is often easier with PPP contractual type concessions than it is through simple permits and construction permits provided for a plot of land.
Jeff, I may want to take the next question on the role of the people and the partnership in the bus terminal and the waste management projects that we talked about. So I think there's this question about these seem to be privately initiated projects. First and foremost, they were actually municipality initiated projects. The need for these projects was felt by the municipality, and they designed and they structured the project before they went to procure or bring in the private partner to deliver some of the services. Of course, this project, each one of these projects took more than a year and a half to put together, and to be able to share that within 20 minutes, 2 projects is not the easiest. So I couldn't probably talk about how the partnership actually worked and what the role of the people was. But in designing the project, the input that came in, there was a lot of interaction with people, the citizens, people in the society, the influencers, and so on and so forth, in getting their views into designing the project. In the municipal solid waste project, it was far more, because at the end of the day, you were designing a project that had a daily interaction with every citizen of the city, every household of the city, every shop of the city, so their inputs was absolutely essential to be able to design and structure. So in the project development and in the project process, there was a whole lot of interaction with people. Even on the bus terminal, the location and the selection of the bus terminal, what kind of amenities, what kind of services were required by the people, were all inputs that were brought in by interaction of the municipality with the people. So that's the role that the people and the people interaction played in designing, structuring the project. Secondly, the role of the municipality, somehow I seem to have conveyed, ends with having tendered and signing the contract. That is definitely not the case. Like Jeff said, a typical contract, both of these contracts were close to 100-page contracts, if not more. And there were many elements in there which define the role that the municipality will continue to play even after the project is in the operation mode. One of the key responsibilities is to deliver on key roles is to deliver on all the responsibilities that the municipality takes on. So for instance, let's say in the case of the bus terminal, ensuring that the buses actually go inside the bus terminal. The second and the most important role is monitoring. In the solid waste management, the municipality played a huge role to ensure that they monitored the service delivery and it was working as they had imagined it to work. And if it wasn't working at some stage, the municipality interventions keep coming in. There were review meetings with the municipality weekly to begin with, and then it went on to fortnightly and so on and so forth. So the municipality is continuously engaged in the project to see how it is performing, play its role where it is required, and so on and so forth. So the success of the project is in continued partnership. The responsibility of the municipality is not just to pay the fee at the end of it. So when we did this project, the mobile apps, sorry, this is a question on whether mobile apps as a monitoring function works well. When I'd actually worked on this project, mobile apps were not as popular as they are today. But really what we were doing, the municipality made sure was that there were, I think in this city, if I remember right, 10 or was it 11 consumer redressal centers. And there were telephonic and there were phone numbers that were widely shared of, if you have a solid waste problem, please call this number. And then there were some redressal centers. If there was continued problem over 3 consecutive days or 2 consecutive days, it gets escalated, etc. But yes, I mean, in today's day and age, a mobile app would work wonderfully. And I think the citizens I've generally seen, when you seek their feedback, they're very happy to provide feedback in terms of the service delivery if you make it easy for them to do that. So that is something that would come. And yes, I think it is better for the waste contractors to collect waste when the bins are full rather than trucks come on a daily basis. Yeah, so I think the trick that we did was to marry the two, which is make sure that the trucks came in every day exactly when the bins were full. So for instance, there was the whole plan. So a road would have, let's say, 70 households. 70 households would have enough waste to fill in one 3.5 cubic meter bin. And that would get filled up by 12 because all the waste had to be collected by 12. So there was a whole route plan for each one of these dumper placer loaders as to where they would go. So, at 12:30, they would pick it up from point A. At 12:30, whatever, 9, they would pick it up from point B and, then go to the transfer station, come back. Each loader would make so many bins. So, I mean, yeah, there was a very, very detailed plan based on when these bins would go in. And of course, all the vehicles had what are they called? GPS on the vehicle. So from a center point, you could monitor exactly where these dumper loaders were, that they were not going around the city uselessly and aimlessly. They were going where they were supposed to be at that point, etc., etc. So yes, it was a pretty detailed plan to really match picking up of the bins when it was full, but when it was not overflowing, and daily at a time, so that there was no waste lying around.
Abhijit, we need to close up. Let me give you one more question that came in on the text, which is, how do you make sure that no more than 20% of the waste generated goes to the landfill?
So the municipality.
After that, we're gonna close up the session. Any questions, any additional questions you have, we can address them during the next session.
So there was a weigh bridge at the entrance of the landfill site. And B, there was a municipality person who monitored that weigh bridge at the landfill site. So on a daily basis at a transfer station, we knew exactly how much waste was collected. So that was the primary amount of collection. And we made sure on a daily basis that not more than 20% of that entered the landfill site on the weigh bridge. So, and then there was a person nominated by the municipality who monitored the weigh bridge. So that is how we were controlling the amount of waste, not more than 20% into the landfill site. Okay, so that's it then.
Great. Thanks, Abhijit. Thank you so much. That was super interesting. And always great that there are two very different projects, lots of different lessons learned between the two. So thank you very much for that. And we've gone quite a bit over, so I would just want to wrap up really quickly. Our next session is next week. We're going to have a continuation talking about how municipalities can prepare themselves for these kind of projects, the kind of capacity that they need, and the systems they need to have in place. But we will start, if there are additional questions, just send it to us by text, and we'll address it at the beginning of that session. Over to you, Nusha.
Thank you, Jeff and Abhijit, for today's session. I hope you all had a productive and knowledgeable session. Please join our fourth session on 14 July at 10 a.m. Thank you for your participation today. Have a good day ahead.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.